Hi guys, in this video I just want to go through my latest render and just give a short breakdown on the scene and how everything was constructed in Blender. Now this, or usually most of my videos are not tutorials. I do make tutorials, but this is not a tutorial. It's just like a commentary where I explain some of the things I feel might be confusing. I actually have a time lapse for the construction of this scene, so you can check it out. I am going to leave the link in the description. Okay, so I started off by getting some inspiration from ArtStation. I gathered all my images, actually just this image in particular, and I put it in PureRef. PureRef allows you to PureRef, sorry, PureRef allows you to have all your images in one place, and it's really good for reference photos. So I started out some scene blockouts. I was using the ANT landscape add-on to generate terrains. I was just trying something out at the beginning. Initially, I tried using an HDRI, but I wasn't getting enough of the sunlight. So I switched to Blender's inbuilt sky texture. I played around with the figures, just trying to figure out what was best for the scene. I then continued my scene blockout with basic shapes. In fact, the whole time I just wanted to get the basic layout so I could start adding detail to the scene. Oh, and also, if you ever get black objects in your viewports like this, just make sure you're using the original file for the scene, as in the file you used to make that scene, or the latest version in Blender, the latest Blender version. Okay, so here I just started adding models from Sketchfab. Some of these models I had already downloaded them. Some of them too, just from browsing. I got them. I did a little kit bashing, but still trying to get my overall layout. Over here, I'm enhancing the fence with a color ramp because it seemed like it was really transparent, and I added an array too at the end, of course. Um, okay, so I had downloaded this texture from ambientcg.com. This is actually when I'm making the ground, and I just imported it into my plane. I actually had issues in getting my ground to look realistic. It looked really tight, but then I went through this long procedure of duplicating and mixing and some repetitive stuff. But I actually have a video explaining very well how I made my textures look good. So I'm also going to link that in the description. Okay, so after I got my ground figured out, I still felt like my scene didn't match the original enough. Although I was in early stages, I still felt like there was more to do. So I did some tweaks to the camera. I even added a new camera because I just felt like the scene didn't look like what I was trying to make. And it started to come through. So I started to model and add detail to the container. This is the rusty one at the extreme right. I just added some loop cuts. I did some beveling, extruding, and scaling, and I was okay to go. I added a road. I actually tried as possible to mimic everything I saw in the picture. Well, for the road, I used a material from the add-on EPBR, and later on, I added a shrink modifier, and that was how come I got rid of the shadows, because as you can see, there are shadows under the plane. I also did a little UV unwrapping, although it wasn't really necessary because the stretching was not so bad. I modeled more detail in the foreground. For this part, it's just an array, and I got back on Sketchfab to hunt for more models to fit the scene. I wasn't really getting what I wanted. Hunting for models is very, very difficult, but Sketchfab is a very good place. I just improvised with what I had. The models I got from Sketchfab had issues with their texturing, so I just added a principled BSDF, and then I reconnected all the textures into that one, and they seem better. For the texture inside the building, I used the wood texture from the add-on I mentioned earlier, EPBR. I'm going to link the add-on in the description so you can check it out from there. And I just scaled until I got something similar to the original. I plugged in a hue saturation node because I realized my color of the building didn't look so good as compared to the original. So I just used the hue saturation node to get the correct colors. I did something similar for my ground plane in the mid ground, but I didn't check the scale and tiling. I was also corrected with a hue saturation. I added some more elements from Sketchfab and I also fixed their shaders. So I tried modeling the shed from the original. I thought it was cool, but I discarded it later on in the video. But when I was modeling it, I just did some loop cuts and I extruded some parts. Some simple Blender modeling skills. I added in more models from Sketchfab and I fixed the textures. Okay, so in fact, my computer crashed. It crashed a lot of times, but this time it was really, really crashing. And I got back to modeling the concrete. I actually wanted them to look like they were covered in sand, but it didn't really turn out as expected. But it was still okay. For I then tried to like add gravels to the scene by adding a plane and a particle system. I used Blender's inbuilt rock generator, and I got some random stone shapes. I put them into a collection. I just used the particle system. If you're familiar, I'm not so good with geometry notes. Then I added child particles to increase the number like drastically, and I used weight paints to control how I would share the particles on the plane, of course. Okay, so for the texturing of the container, I actually followed a tutorial by Kaizen on YouTube. You guys have to check him out. His tutorials are so good. He has this tutorial about smart materials that I just followed to help. It didn't come out as expected. It didn't come out so good, but I felt like it was good enough for the render. So, yeah, Kaizen, I owe you a lot. Thank you. I began to work on the shed like building. I'm not sure if it's a shed, but I'm just calling it a shed. I tried to UV unwrap it to get the image projection, but the image was just not high quality enough, and the model just began to look so off. I added in a new cube, and I used the same instances because I had to remodel it again. And I projected it from view this time, and I modeled on it. I used a knife tool to get accurate shapes because the windows on the image just looked off. And I added more models into the scene. But I was happy with what I had gotten around this time. So I realized the landscapes I had used earlier on were not good enough. So I went online, I found some PNG images of mountains, I brought them into the background. I scaled the scene, rotated it a bit to be in line with the camera. I did some finishing touches and then I rendered out my scene and I went into compositing. So while I was compositing, I actually wanted to use the mist pass, but I could not because my exposure was low. I actually tweaked my settings in the exposure panel because my sky texture was too bright. So my mist apparently affected my mist pass too, and my mist was also quite dim because of my low exposure. So I got rid of the mist pass and I just focused on color grading and color correction. I wanted this orange dusty feel. So that was what I went in for. Um Around this time I wasn't trying to be like the original render. I wasn't trying to make the exact same thing because I felt like I had already gathered enough inspiration. So I just worked and played around with what I could get. I added some lens distortion and some blur. I just wanted it to be like a real life camera because this is a realistic scene. And I added some overall noise and I mixed it using, I think, an overlay. Yeah, I used an overlay and that was how I fixed it. Yeah, so yeah. So that is how I made this video in that's how I made sorry, that's how I made this render. If you like it, consider leaving a like. I'm going to drop this Blender file on my Patreon so you can check that out. On my Patreon, I just have my Blender project files over there. So all the renders I've made that come on YouTube, the project files on Patreon. Is my Patreon for that. I just my only tier. It's around $3. I might even reduce it, but it's just for those who want to support me. It's not really like I'm selling something. It's just for support. So if you want to support me and want to help me make more content for you guys, you can just join my Patreon. It's $3. Yes. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can just leave a like and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot.